Black bride sent to kitchen as a joke until she cooked a meal that made the rich rancher. The weathered foreman smirked as he tossed a stained apron at the refined woman stepping off the dusty stagecoach. The ranch hands erupted in cruel laughter, their eyes filled with dismissal as they looked upon her polished dress and hopeful expression. She was destined to fail spectacularly, they assumed, nothing more than kitchen help in a world that had no place for her dignity. But the towering rancher who owned this empire watched from his porch with different eyes, a man whose obsession with culinary perfection had left him disappointed by every cook who'd tried to meet his impossible standards. What none of them knew was that she carried secrets from her past that could either elevate them both to unprecedented success or destroy everything they'd worked to build. Would her hidden talents become the key to their mutual salvation, or would the weight of prejudice crush them both? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt outside Whitmore Ranch, kicking up a cloud of Wyoming dust that settled on Magnolia Thorne's carefully pressed traveling dress. She stepped down with practiced grace, her leather satchel clutched tightly in gloved hands. The ranch hands stopped their work to stare. Augustus Whitmore emerged from the main house, his tall frame casting a long shadow across the porch. His jaw tightened as he took in the sight before him. This was not what the matrimonial agency had promised. Not at all. Jeremiah Murphy, the ranch foreman, spat into the dirt and approached with slow, deliberate steps. His weathered face bore the skeptical expression of a man who had seen too many disappointments. "You sure you got the right place, miss?" Murphy's voice carried across the yard, loud enough for everyone to hear. Magnolia lifted her chin. "I believe I do. I'm here to see Mr. Whitmore regarding our correspondence." The ranch hands exchanged glances. A few chuckled under their breath. Gus descended the porch steps, his boots heavy against the wood. He had built his cattle empire through careful calculation and precise judgment. This situation required both. "Miss Thorne." His tone remained neutral. "There seems to have been some confusion with the agency." "Confusion?" Magnolia's composure wavered for just a moment. "The arrangement we discussed through letters." Gus gestured toward the house. "Perhaps we should speak privately." Inside his study, leather-bound ledgers lined the walls, alongside certificates documenting his ranch's success. Gus poured himself a whiskey but did not offer one to his guest. "I was expecting someone different," he said bluntly. "The agency assured me we would be well matched for a business partnership as much as a marriage." Magnolia set her satchel down carefully. "I assure you, Mr. Whitmore, I am entirely capable of being both a suitable wife and partner in any endeavor you might require. The social expectations in this territory are particular." Gus studied her face for any sign of understanding. "My business relationships depend on certain considerations." "I see." Magnolia's voice remained steady despite the growing realization of her precarious situation. A sharp knock interrupted them. Murphy entered without waiting for permission. "Boss, that Brass woman is riding up. Looks like she's got questions." Cordelia Brass swept into the study moments later, her elaborate riding dress and feathered hat announcing her status as the territory's self-appointed social authority. Her eyes immediately fixed on Magnolia with undisguised disapproval. "Augustus, what exactly is this arrangement?" Cordelia's voice carried the weight of social judgment. "The entire town is already talking." "A temporary situation," Gus replied carefully. "Nothing that concerns the community." "Everything concerns the community, when it involves the territory's most prominent rancher." Cordelia's gaze never left Magnolia, especially with the cattle baron's feast approaching. "Your reputation affects us all." After Cordelia's departure, the study felt smaller. Gus paced to the window overlooking his vast holdings. "I cannot offer you marriage," he said finally. "But I'm not heartless enough to send you back east with nothing." Magnolia stood straighter. "What do you propose? Can you cook?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Outside, Murphy's voice could be heard giving orders to the other hands. "I can." "Then you can earn your keep in the kitchen. Temporary arrangement until other plans can be made." Magnolia nodded once. It was not what she had traveled across the country to find, but it was survival. Murphy appeared in the doorway again, this time holding a stained kitchen apron. His expression made clear what he thought of the situation. Figured she might need this if she's going to be playing cook. He tossed the apron toward Magnolia. Hope you know more about biscuits than you do about ranching. The other hands gathered outside the window, drawn by the entertainment. Their faces showed varying degrees of amusement and skepticism. Magnolia caught the apron and smoothed its wrinkled fabric. I suppose we'll find out. That evening she stood alone in the ranch kitchen, surveying the basic supplies and cast iron equipment. The space was functional but uninspired, designed for feeding working men rather than creating anything memorable. Through the window, she could see Gus speaking with another well-dressed man beside an expensive carriage. Their conversation appeared tense, the stranger's gestures emphatic. Samuel Cross owned the neighboring spread and harbored ambitions that extended beyond cattle ranching. His visit suggested business complications that went deeper than Magnolia's unexpected arrival. She tied the apron around her waist and began examining the available ingredients. Salt pork, beans, flour, and a few basic spices comprised the standard fare, but in her hands, even simple ingredients could become something extraordinary. The knowledge burned inside her like a hidden flame. Years of training at Miss Thornfield's finishing academy had taught her skills these men could never imagine. Her father's military pension had paid for education that rivaled the finest Eastern establishments. But that life was gone now, destroyed by accusations she could not fight and circumstances beyond her control. This kitchen, humble as it was, represented her only chance to rebuild. She began to work, her movements efficient and practiced. Tomorrow would bring the first test of her abilities. The ranch hands expected failure, even hoped for it. They had no idea what was coming. Dawn broke over Whitmore Ranch with the usual sounds of cattle lowing, and men preparing for another day of hard work. In the kitchen, Magnolia had been awake for an hour, studying the ingredients available to her with the intensity of a general planning battle strategy. The pantry held basic supplies: salt pork, dried beans, flour, lard, and a few precious spices that previous cooks had barely touched. Most ranch kitchens focused on quantity over quality, filling bellies rather than satisfying palates. Magnolia rolled up her sleeves and began to work. She started with the beans, sorting them with careful attention to size and color. Her fingers moved with practiced precision, removing any that showed signs of damage. The salt pork required careful trimming to remove excess fat while preserving the flavor that would infuse the entire dish. Outside, Murphy directed the morning activities with his usual gruff efficiency. The hands moved about their tasks, occasionally glancing toward the kitchen windows with amused curiosity. "Wonder what kind of mess she's making in there," one of them muttered. "Probably burned the coffee already," another replied. But no smoke emerged from the kitchen chimney except the controlled burn of a properly managed fire. Magnolia had learned fire management from Chef Auguste at the academy, a man who could control heat with the precision of a master craftsman. She prepared the beans with techniques that transformed humble ingredients into something extraordinary. The salt pork was rendered slowly, its fat becoming the foundation for layers of flavor. Onions, carefully diced, went into the hot fat until they turned golden and sweet. The beans followed, along with carefully measured water and a combination of spices that would have surprised anyone watching. Bay leaves, black pepper, a touch of molasses, and a secret ingredient she had learned from her father's army cook, a former slave who had taught her that excellence could emerge from the simplest materials. While the beans simmered, she turned her attention to bread. The flour was coarse but workable. Her hands kneaded the dough with rhythm and purpose, developing the gluten until the texture became smooth and elastic. The morning sun climbed higher as wonderful aromas began to drift from the kitchen. Murphy noticed first, pausing in his instructions to sniff the air. The other hands soon followed, their mockery gradually replaced by curiosity. Gus emerged from his office where he had been reviewing cattle manifests. The smell stopped him in his tracks. In 35 years of ranch life, he had never experienced anything quite like it. His mother had been an exceptional cook before consumption claimed her when he was 12. Her memory was tied to the taste of perfectly prepared food, a standard no subsequent cook had ever approached. The aroma from the kitchen stirred something he had thought permanently buried. Noon approached with unusual anticipation hanging over the ranch. The hands completed their morning tasks, but lingered near the main house instead of dispersing to distant pastures. Even the cattle seemed calmer than usual. Magnolia worked steadily, tasting and adjusting seasonings with the confidence of someone who understood not just recipes, but the fundamental principles that made food transcend mere sustenance. Her training had been comprehensive, covering everything from basic nutrition to the subtle art of presentation. The memory surfaced unbidden as she worked. Miss Thornfield's academy had been more than a finishing school. It was an institution that prepared young women for lives of influence and responsibility. Her father, Sergeant Major William Thorne, had believed education was the key to transcending circumstances of birth. "Excellence," he had told her during their last conversation, "is the only weapon they cannot take from you." But they had taken everything else. The accusations had destroyed his military career and her social standing in a single devastating week. False charges of theft, planted evidence, and a legal system that favored accusers over the accused had left them both ruined. She pushed the memories aside and focused on the present task. The beans were perfectly tender, their cooking liquid thick and rich. The bread emerged from the oven, golden brown, its crust crackling as it cooled. She prepared a simple salad from wild greens she had found growing near the well, dressed with a vinaigrette that elevated humble plants to unexpected heights. At precisely 12:30, she rang the dinner bell. The sound carried across the ranch yard, summoning men accustomed to meals that fueled their bodies without engaging their senses. They approached the dining hall with the usual mixture of hunger and resignation. Murphy entered first, his expression still skeptical despite the promising aromas. The other hands followed, taking their customary seats at the long wooden table. Gus appeared last, his face carefully neutral. Magnolia served the meal with quiet efficiency. The beans were presented in individual bowls, their surface glossy with rendered fat and garnished with fresh herbs. The bread was sliced thick and still warm. The salad provided a bright contrast to the rich main dish. The first spoonful brought complete silence to the dining hall. Murphy stopped chewing mid-bite, his expression shifting from skepticism to bewilderment. The other hands followed suit, their usual mealtime chatter replaced by focused attention on the food before them. Gus took a careful taste, then another. The flavors were complex and perfectly balanced, each ingredient contributing to a harmony that elevated the simple dish far beyond its humble origins. It was not his mother's cooking, but it achieved something he had not thought possible. It was better. The silence stretched as grown men accustomed to harsh conditions found themselves completely absorbed in a meal that challenged every assumption they had made about the woman who had prepared it. The dining hall remained eerily quiet as forks scraped against empty bowls. Murphy set down his spoon and stared at the table, his weathered face showing confusion rather than his usual certainty. The other hands exchanged glances but found no words adequate for what they had just experienced. Gus finished his portion methodically, each bite confirming what the first had revealed. This was not luck or accident. This was mastery. "Miss Thorne," he said finally, "a word." In his study, Gus poured himself a whiskey with hands that trembled slightly. The meal had shaken something loose inside him, memories he had carefully buried beneath years of practical ranch management. "Where did you learn to cook like that?" Magnolia smoothed her apron. "I had proper instruction, Mr. Whitmore." "Proper instruction." He repeated the words slowly. That was not kitchen training. That was artistry. She met his gaze directly. "I attended Miss Thornfield's academy in Philadelphia. My father believed in comprehensive education." The pieces began forming a picture Gus had not expected. Military father, Eastern education, refinement that extended far beyond surface manners. The matrimonial agency had not been entirely dishonest after all. "I have a proposition," he said. "Not marriage, employment, head cook position with fair wages and respect." Magnolia considered the offer. It was not what she had traveled west to find, but it represented something valuable. Opportunity. I accept. Word of the extraordinary meal spread through the territory with the speed of prairie fire. By evening, 3 neighboring ranchers had found excuses to visit Whitmore Ranch. By the following day, Murphy was fielding questions from cattle buyers who had heard rumors about the cooking. Magnolia transformed the kitchen into something approaching a professional operation. She organized supplies, improved storage systems, and established routines that maximized both efficiency and quality. Her background had included instruction in household management on a scale these men had never imagined. The evening meal surpassed even the afternoon's achievement. Beef stew with vegetables prepared in ways that enhanced rather than masked their natural flavors. Biscuits so light they seemed to defy the laws of physics. A dessert crafted from dried fruit that tasted like something from an expensive hotel. Murphy approached the kitchen after dinner, hat in hand. His usual swagger had been replaced by something approaching humility. "Miss Thorne, I owe you an apology." She looked up from cleaning her workspace. "For what, Mr. Murphy?" "For thinking you were something you're not." Over the following weeks, Magnolia's reputation grew beyond the ranch boundaries. Gus began hosting dinner meetings with potential business partners, using the exceptional meals as a backdrop for negotiations. Contracts that had stalled for months suddenly moved forward over plates of perfectly prepared food. The cattle buyers who visited during roundup season left with more than livestock agreements. They carried stories about the Whitmore ranch cook whose skills rivaled the finest establishments in Denver or San Francisco. Magnolia found herself consulted on matters beyond the kitchen. Her education had included business principles, and she began offering suggestions about ranch operations, feed quality improvements, worker nutrition programs that increased productivity, cost management strategies that impressed even Gus's calculating mind. Their working relationship evolved into something approaching partnership. Gus valued her insights and began seeking her opinion on decisions that extended far beyond meal planning. She responded with intelligence and practical wisdom that complemented his own business instincts. But success brought complications. Cordelia Brass arrived for an unannounced inspection, her disapproval evident before she dismounted her horse. She swept into the main house with the authority of someone accustomed to social compliance. "Augustus, this situation has become completely inappropriate." Gus received her in the parlor, his manner polite but firm. "What situation?" "The entire territory is talking about your arrangement with that woman. It reflects poorly on all of us." "My business arrangements are my own concern." Cordelia's eyes narrowed. "Your business arrangements affect the social fabric of our community. The cattle baron's feast is approaching. What message does this send about our standards?" The annual Cattle Baron's Feast represented the territory's most important social and business event. Contracts were negotiated, partnerships formed, and reputations established during the 3-day gathering. Gus's participation was not optional. "My standards," he said carefully, "have never been higher." "Standards." Cordelia's voice carried disdain. "You cannot possibly intend to have her cook for the feast." "I intend exactly that." After Cordelia's departure, Gus found Magnolia in the garden she had established behind the kitchen. Vegetables and herbs grew in neat rows, evidence of planning and agricultural knowledge that surprised him daily. "We have a problem," he said. She looked up from tending the plants. "Mrs. Brass, the feast will determine whether this ranch continues to prosper or becomes socially isolated. If the community boycotts, business relationships suffer." Magnolia understood the implications. Success in the territory required more than excellence. It required acceptance from people who might never be willing to give it. "What do you want to do?" Gus studied her face, seeing strength he was still learning to recognize. "I want to trust that quality will triumph over prejudice." "And if it doesn't?" "Then we'll face the consequences together." The decision carried risks that extended beyond social embarrassment. Samuel Cross had been circulating rumors about Gus's judgment, suggesting that a man who made poor personal choices might prove unreliable in business matters. The feast would put everything to the test. Magnolia returned to her plants, her movements deliberate and sure. She had faced destruction before and emerged stronger. This challenge would require every skill she possessed, but it was not insurmountable. Excellence, her father had taught her, was the only weapon they could not take away. The pressure began mounting 3 weeks before the cattle baron's feast. Samuel Cross made a point of visiting neighboring ranches, his conversations carefully designed to plant seeds of doubt about Gus Whitmore's business judgment. A man who makes questionable personal decisions, Cross would say with practiced concern, might prove equally unreliable in cattle contracts. 2 established business partners sent polite letters postponing planned agreements until after the social season concluded. The messages were diplomatically worded, but their meaning was clear. Wait and see how the community responds. Gus stood in his study reviewing the correspondence when Magnolia knocked. She entered carrying a tea service that filled the room with the aroma of carefully blended herbs from her garden. "Mr. Patterson and Mr. Hayes have withdrawn their support," he said without looking up. "Temporarily." "Perhaps." Gus accepted the tea, noting how the simple act of proper service elevated even this moment of crisis. Cross has been busy spreading concerns about my reliability. Magnolia had suspected Samuel Cross of orchestrating more than casual gossip. His visits to town coincided too perfectly with new rumors about the ranch's unconventional arrangements. What kind of concerns? That a rancher who ignores social conventions might prove similarly careless with business obligations. The strategy was effective because it contained a grain of logic that reasonable people might accept. In a territory where trust determined the success of verbal agreements worth thousands of dollars, reputation mattered as much as cattle quality. That evening, Magnolia walked to the edge of the ranch property where the mail road intersected the main trail to town. She had developed a habit of evening walks, ostensibly for exercise but actually for observation. The timing of Cross's visits, the pattern of his movements, the carefully coordinated nature of the social pressure. Murphy appeared beside her, his approach silent despite his size. "Figured you might want to know," he said quietly. "Cross has been meeting with some of the other foremen, asking questions about how things are run here." "What kind of questions?" "Financial questions. How many head we're running, what kind of contracts the boss has pending, information a competitor might find useful." Magnolia filed this detail alongside others she had been collecting. Cross's interest extended beyond social disruption into direct business intelligence gathering. "Has anyone been talking?" Murphy's expression hardened. "Not from this ranch, but he's got other sources." The next morning brought a visit from James Morrison, the banker who handled most ranch financing in the territory. His arrival was unexpected, and his manner suggested more than a social call. Gus received him in the study while Magnolia prepared refreshments in the kitchen. Through the partially open door, she could hear fragments of their conversation. "Concerns about the upcoming season," Morrison was saying. "Some of your usual partners are reconsidering their commitments." "Based on what?" "Market conditions, social considerations, the usual factors that influence business confidence." Magnolia understood that Morrison was delivering a warning disguised as friendly advice. Banks preferred stable, predictable clients over those who generated community controversy. She served coffee and small pastries, noting how Morrison's eyes followed her movements with barely concealed disapproval. His reaction confirmed what she already suspected. The social campaign was affecting financial relationships as well. After Morrison's departure, Gus sat in unusual silence. The ranch's success depended on credit arrangements that required banker confidence. If financial support wavered, even temporarily, the timing could prove catastrophic during the crucial autumn trading season. "How bad is it?" Magnolia asked. "Bad enough. Morrison wants assurance that I'll handle the feast situation appropriately." "Meaning?" "Meaning he expects me to find a different cook for the event." The suggestion hung between them like a challenge. Gus had built his empire through calculated risks and precise judgment. This decision would define not just the ranch's immediate future, but the principles he was willing to defend. Magnolia began planning her response to the crisis with the same methodical approach she applied to meal preparation. Excellence required more than skill. It demanded strategy, timing, and absolute commitment to achieving the desired result. She spent the following days researching every detail she could discover about the cattle baron's feast: previous menus, guest preferences, social expectations, and logistical requirements. If she was going to cook for the event, it would be the most important meal of her life. But research revealed something else. Samuel Cross had been unusually active in the feast planning committee, making suggestions about venues, guest lists, and social protocols. His involvement seemed designed to maximize his influence over the event's outcome. The pattern reminded her of something from her past: the methodical way false accusations had been constructed against her father, the careful coordination of evidence and testimony that had destroyed his military career. Cross's approach showed the same calculating precision. That evening she found Gus in the barn reviewing livestock records by lantern light. His dedication to detail had always impressed her, but tonight he seemed burdened by more than usual business concerns. "I've made my decision about the feast," he said without looking up. "We proceed as planned. You cook, regardless of consequences." "Why?" "Because compromising on excellence leads to compromising on everything else. If I sacrifice you to social pressure, what principle do I defend next time?" Magnolia felt something shift between them, a deepening of mutual respect that transcended their employer-employee arrangement. Gus was risking everything he had built to support her right to prove herself through merit rather than social acceptance. "Then we'd better make sure the meal is perfect." "It will be," Gus said with certainty. "That's never been in question." The cattle baron's feast was 10 days away. 10 days to prepare for a test that would determine not just their individual futures, but whether excellence could truly triumph over prejudice in a territory where social conformity often mattered more than ability. The cattle baron's feast preparations consumed the ranch for the final week. Magnolia worked 18-hour days planning a menu that would showcase not just her skills, but the full potential of Western ingredients prepared with Eastern refinement. She had requisitioned supplies from Denver, carefully calculating quantities and timing for dishes that would feed 60 of the territory's most influential people. Beef would be the centerpiece, but prepared in ways that elevated it beyond simple ranch fare. 3 days before the event, Cordelia Brass made a final attempt at intervention. She arrived with 2 other prominent wives, their coordinated approach suggesting careful planning. "Augustus," Cordelia began without preamble, "the committee has voted. If you proceed with this inappropriate arrangement, half the territory will boycott the event." Gus received them in the main parlor, his manner courteous but unyielding. "The committee doesn't employ my cook, I do." "This affects everyone's reputation," insisted Martha Patterson, the banker's wife. "Social standards exist for important reasons." "My standards," Gus replied evenly, "are based on excellence rather than convention." After their departure, Magnolia continued her preparations with focused intensity. She had spent the previous evening organizing intelligence she had been gathering about Samuel Cross's business practices. The pattern of his activities suggested corruption that extended far beyond social manipulation. Cross had been systematically undermining contracts between ranchers, then positioning himself to benefit from the resulting conflicts. His timing was too precise to be coincidental. Someone was providing him with detailed information about pending agreements and financial arrangements. The evidence was circumstantial, but compelling. Cross's sudden prosperity coincided with a series of failed partnerships between other ranchers. His expansion plans required capital that exceeded his legitimate income sources. Most telling, his campaign against Gus had begun before Magnolia's arrival, suggesting deeper motives than social concern. 2 days before the feast, Murphy approached Magnolia in the kitchen, where she was preparing stocks that would form the foundation for multiple dishes. "Found something you might want to see," he said quietly, handing her a letter that had fallen from Samuel Cross's saddlebag during his latest visit. The correspondence was addressed to a business associate in Denver, detailing information about Gus's cattle contracts that should have been confidential. Cross had been selling intelligence to competitors while simultaneously sabotaging local relationships. "How did you come by this?" Magnolia asked. Cross got careless, left his saddlebag open while talking to some of the boys. Wind caught the papers. Magnolia studied the letter carefully, recognizing the systematic approach that reminded her of the conspiracy that had destroyed her father's career. But this time, she was in position to fight back. The day of the feast dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for the outdoor portions of the celebration. Magnolia had been awake since before dawn, coordinating the complex timing required for multiple courses that would be served over 6 hours. Her menu represented a fusion of Eastern technique with Western ingredients. Beef prepared 3 different ways, each showcasing different aspects of the meat's potential. Vegetables from her own garden, preserved and prepared to complement rather than compete with the primary dishes. Desserts that would provide a refined conclusion to what she intended to be an unforgettable meal. The guests began arriving at noon, their carriages creating a parade of territorial wealth and influence. Magnolia watched from the kitchen window as men who controlled thousands of acres and millions of dollars in livestock gathered to conduct business over food. Samuel Cross appeared among the early arrivals, his manner confident and sociable. He moved through the crowd with the ease of someone who expected the day's events to unfold in his favor. The first course was served at 1 o'clock. Magnolia had chosen a subtle beginning that would not overwhelm palates, but would immediately establish the meal's exceptional quality. Soup prepared from beef bones that had been roasted and simmered for 2 days, garnished with vegetables cut with mathematical precision. The reaction was immediate. Conversations paused as men accustomed to functional ranch food encountered something that engaged their senses in unexpected ways. The soup was familiar enough to be comfortable, but sophisticated enough to command attention. Gus moved through the gathering. His manner relaxed despite the stakes involved. Several guests complimented the meal's opening course, their surprise evident in voices that had expected competent but unremarkable food. The second course elevated the experience further. Beef prepared as individual portions, each piece cooked to precise doneness, and accompanied by vegetables that had been transformed through techniques these men had never encountered. The presentation was elegant without being pretentious, sophisticated without losing connection to the land that had produced the ingredients. By the third course, even the most skeptical guests were paying attention. This was not luck or accident. This was mastery applied to familiar ingredients with results that exceeded anything available in the territory's finest establishments. Samuel Cross's confident manner began showing signs of strain as conversations around him focused increasingly on praise for the exceptional meal. His campaign to undermine Gus's reputation was being overwhelmed by undeniable evidence of superior judgment. During the break between main courses and dessert, Magnolia made her move. She approached Cross directly, carrying the letter Murphy had recovered, along with additional evidence she had compiled. "Mr. Cross," she said quietly, "I believe this belongs to you." Cross's face went pale as he recognized the correspondence. His eyes darted around the gathering, calculating whether anyone else could see what she was showing him. "I also have documentation of your other business arrangements," Magnolia continued. "Information that might interest the territorial authorities. What do you want?" "Justice," she replied simply. "Starting now." Samuel Cross stared at the evidence in Magnolia's hands, his carefully constructed confidence crumbling like sand. The letter to his Denver associate contained enough detail to destroy not just his reputation, but his freedom if territorial authorities investigated further. "You have 5 minutes to confess your schemes to the gathering," Magnolia said quietly. "Or I present this evidence publicly, along with testimony from your other victims." Cross's eyes darted toward the assembled cattle barons, men whose trust he had systematically betrayed, while maintaining the facade of legitimate competition. His breathing became shallow as he calculated options that no longer existed. "How did you know?" "The same methodical approach you used against my father in Philadelphia, but this time someone was watching." The revelation hit Cross like a physical blow. He had been so focused on his local schemes that he had failed to recognize the daughter of the man whose military career he had helped destroy through false testimony and planted evidence. Magnolia had spent months gathering proof of Cross's corruption network, bank records showing suspicious transactions, correspondence revealing insider information, testimony from ranch hands who had witnessed meetings between Cross and competitors. The evidence formed a pattern of systematic fraud that extended across multiple territories. "You destroyed innocent people for profit," she continued, "but you made the mistake of targeting someone who could fight back." Cross looked toward the exit, but Murphy and 3 other ranch hands had positioned themselves strategically around the gathering. There would be no escape from consequences he had spent years believing he could avoid. The dessert course was served as Cross struggled with his impossible situation. Magnolia had created a masterpiece that concluded the meal with perfect grace. Fruit tarts that captured the essence of Western abundance refined through Eastern technique. Coffee that had been roasted and prepared with the same attention to excellence that characterized every aspect of the feast. As the guests savored the final course, Cross stood unsteadily and cleared his throat. His face had gone ashen, but he knew delay would only worsen his position. "Gentlemen, I have a confession to make." The gathering fell silent as Cross began detailing his schemes: the systematic theft of business intelligence, the manipulation of contracts for personal benefit, the deliberate sabotage of partnerships between honest ranchers. His voice shook as he revealed the full scope of his corruption. The reaction was swift and decisive. James Morrison, the banker, immediately called for territorial authorities. The cattle barons who had been Cross's victims began comparing experiences, realizing how extensively they had been manipulated. Within an hour, Cross was under guard awaiting transport to face criminal charges. But the day's revelations had a deeper impact. Magnolia's strategic intelligence had not only exposed corruption, but demonstrated capabilities that commanded respect from men accustomed to judging others by their actions rather than their appearances. "Miss Thorne," called out William Patterson, one of the territory's most influential ranchers, "that evidence you presented shows remarkable investigative skill." "My education included more than cooking," she replied simply. "Indeed it did. We owe you a considerable debt for exposing Cross's schemes." As the gathering dispersed, the guests made a point of personally thanking both Gus and Magnolia for an extraordinary day. The meal had exceeded every expectation, but the exposure of Cross's corruption had proven even more valuable to their business interests. Cordelia Brass approached as the last guests departed, her manner subdued and thoughtful. "I owe you an apology," she said to Magnolia. "I allowed prejudice to blind me to your obvious qualities." "Apology accepted, Mrs. Brass. The community would be honored to have someone of your capabilities among our leading families." 3 weeks later, Gus found Magnolia in her garden, where autumn vegetables grew in neat rows that would provide fresh ingredients through the winter months. Her systematic approach to cultivation reflected the same excellence she brought to every endeavor. "I have something to ask you," he said, his usual composure replaced by nervous energy. Magnolia looked up from tending the plants, recognizing the significance of his tone. "The original arrangement from the matrimonial agency," he continued, "was based on false assumptions about both of us." "It was, but these months of partnership have revealed something neither of us expected, a compatibility based on mutual respect and shared values." Magnolia straightened, understanding where his words were leading. "I'm asking if you would consider marriage," Gus said. "Not as originally planned, but as genuine partners who have proven their worth to each other." She considered his proposal, thinking about the journey that had brought them to this moment. The humiliation of her arrival, the challenge of proving herself, the satisfaction of excellence recognized and respected. "Yes," she said simply. Their wedding took place 6 weeks later with the entire territory in attendance. Cordelia Brass organized the celebration, determined to demonstrate community support for the union. Samuel Cross's conviction had vindicated Gus's judgment while establishing Magnolia as someone who commanded respect in her own right. 6 months after the wedding, Whitmore Ranch had become the most prosperous operation in the territory under their joint leadership. Magnolia's culinary school attracted students from neighboring states, while her strategic insights continued improving ranch efficiency and profitability. Murphy served as foreman with newfound respect for the power of first impressions to mislead. He had learned that true worth often came disguised in unexpected packages, requiring wisdom to recognize and patience to appreciate. On a spring morning, Magnolia stood in her expanded kitchen preparing breakfast for the ranch hands while reviewing correspondence from her father. His military reputation had been fully restored through evidence she had helped compile. He would visit in autumn to meet his son-in-law and see the empire his daughter had helped build. Gus entered carrying their infant son, a boy whose future would be shaped by parents who had learned that excellence transcended every boundary society might attempt to impose. Their partnership had transformed two lives, exposed corruption, and demonstrated that authentic worth would always triumph when coupled with courage, strategy, and unwavering commitment to the highest standards.